Welcome back. We're joined by Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy, and Peter McCaffrey, president of the Alberta's Institute, discussing the recent Supreme Court ruling 5-3 against the federal government. So the Impact Assessment Act is no longer, it oversteps its jurisdiction. That's what the Supreme Court said. Peter, I want to shift to Alberta specifically. Many a lot of investment has pulled out over Alberta over the last several years, and they feel with the federal government perhaps that there is just no place to come. Will that investment be attracted back? Is there an opportunity now for Alberta to move ahead with further oil and gas development?
So there's a slight hiccup, which is that this was a reference case referred by the Alberta government to get a ruling from the Supreme Court. It wasn't, for example, a private company or a private citizen challenging the constitutionality of the case. And that the problem that creates is that just because the Supreme Court has ruled that the law is unconstitutional, it doesn't automatically stop being in effect. The federal government has to actually act to repeal or change the law in order to bring it into alignment with the Constitution. Unfortunately, the federal government have announced that they intend to make some minor little tweaks here and there that they, in their opinion, believe will bring it into line with the Constitution. I, of course, disagree, but there's a risk there that in another couple of years we're back in court again because the federal government has made these minor changes to a law that was almost entirely ruled unconstitutional, and we have to go back to the court and argue again and be like, look, you said this was unconstitutional. They've barely changed it at all. You need to rule that it's unconstitutional again. And that's a shame because the precedent is that in reference cases, the federal government does act to bring things into alignment and does take them seriously and doesn't use this technicality as kind of a loophole to ignore the court's ruling. But, as Dan said earlier, the federal government has a lot of hubris. They believe they can do whatever they want so long as their cause is just. And I think they're lining themselves up to justify essentially keeping an unconstitutional rule on a technicality for as long as they can and forcing us to go back to court and prove again that the minor changes that they've made mean that it's still unconstitutional. And that creates more uncertainty, that creates more risk for investors in Alberta and in other provinces. This isn't just Alberta. Almost all of the provinces were on Alberta's side in this court case.
Yes.
So unfortunately, I think that's going to continue. Our preference would be for the federal government to repeal the entire act, say, sorry, we got it wrong, and start again with something fresh. But it doesn't look like they're interested in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, to Peter's point, 7 other provinces besides Alberta joined the action. Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Saskatchewan. That's a large chunk of the country. If this many provinces are saying, no, thank you, this is unconstitutional, stay out of my backyard, what moral right does the government have to proceed with this? I mean, governments always look to the next election. Is this going to be favorable? I mean, maybe this is not the biggest hot button issue, but surely people will be upset if the government just continues on.
Well, going back to my younger days as an up-and-coming budding staffer for a minister of housing in 1981-82, when the Constitution came forth, much of that based on 7 of 10 provinces being on board. I think that the number is very significant. The likelihood of the Liberals with the NDP coalition opposing this or going along with it or making any changes between now and the next federal election, slim to none. Nevertheless, it is an issue I think that will be addressed sooner or later, more than likely by a new government. But this is where we see the convergence of of the weakness in the Canadian dollar, an economic outlook that isn't as strong. In fact, it's quite gloomy. And the decisions by this government to really, massacre, if you will, its most important economic engine, like it or not, having energy and production beyond the issue of the constitutionality of the issue at hand. We don't have a lot of capital being attracted to Canada, save and except housing. We know where that's going. Clearly, something is going to have to give. And I think if it is an election, it's economic reality and, of course, affordability now undermining the federal government's hand in terms of the latitude it might have economic and otherwise.
We only have about 30 seconds, Dan, but I want you to ask you a follow-up. Are we too late then? Is in a year or 2 years from the next election, is that going to be too late? 20 seconds.
It may be too late, but I think there are two factors that are taking place: the Coastal Gas Link and, of course, the Trans Mountain expansion. I realize that may be way beyond this issue, but it's important to remind Canadians when they see those two projects up and running, we might find a way to attract to get other projects done with a new government.
Okay, we're going to pack more of this when we return from this commercial break. Please stick around.